You're listening to the Youth for Life podcast with Michelle Bauman, Director of Y for Life at Lutherans for Life, where we prepare youth to be gospel-motivated voices for life. Be sure to stick around after today's live recording of our Chats for Life program to find out how you can be live too on our next Youth for Life podcast. Welcome to Chats for Life tonight. My name is Michelle Bauman. I'm the Director of Y for Life with Lutherans for Life, and it is a joy to have you here tonight to talk about post-Roe, the post-Roe world, and how we should respond to these new realities as Christians. So thanks for joining us. Our guest speaker tonight is Reverend Pastor Salemink, Reverend Michael Salemink, who is the Executive Director of Lutherans for Life. And I'm going to hand it over to him to start us with prayer and start the conversation.
Thanks, Michelle. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to school. Nice to see everyone and good to meet some new folks and to see some familiar faces as well. But let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, without any merit or worthiness on our part, you have given us the gift of life, our bodies, and our neighbors. We give you thanks, especially for the redemption that you have brought to us through your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray that during our time tonight, you would open our hearts to hear the message of how much you love every human being. Open our mouths to speak in testimony of the hope that is within us. Allow us to learn new things, to grow together in our relationships with one another, and motivate us to receive everyone around us as a gift and a privilege from you, with whom we may share in all of the blessings that you promise to those who trust in your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. For his sake we pray. Amen. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Supreme Court decision, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, that happened over the summer and is kind of a big deal, is all about. To understand the Dobbs decision, we have to actually go back about 50 years, long before many of you were born, actually before Mrs. Bauman and I were born, 1972. In the late 60s and the early 70s, the state of restrictions on abortion in the United States was varied. So depending on what state you lived in, there were some states that allowed abortions at some points during pregnancy for some reason. There were other states that didn't allow for almost any reason. Many of them would permit abortions to take place when the pregnancy was a result of sexual assault, or if the person, if the mother was suffering from a significant mental impairment, or if they felt like abortion was necessary to save mom's life, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But it was kind of a patchwork. You have to remember also that in the late 60s and the 1970s, the United States was right in the middle of the sexual revolution. So the mid part of the 20th century, there was a civil rights movement, and that had to do with earning respect and rights for persons of different ethnic backgrounds, but also it was a movement that had begun in the earlier part of the century to earn appropriate rights and respect for women. A fantastic movement that Christians should be thankful for. But what happened after World War II in the mid part of the century was there was sort of a disillusionment with the old way of doing things, right? So the traditional ways of thinking about a lot of things were being challenged because World War II was so awful. The Holocaust, nuclear weapons, the Cold War led to generations of people who wanted to question tradition and challenge all of authority. And that bled over into the sexual revolution, which had the belief that sexuality should not just be governed by religious or moral ideas, right? That human beings are animals and sexuality is a bodily function. It's a natural appetite. And so people should have the right to be able to use their bodies in any way that they saw fit. And sexuality should not be seen as just being reserved for marriages or even relationships where there was significant intimacy. Into all of this sort of powder keg came a young lady named Norma McCorvey. She was from Texas. She was unmarried, and she wanted to have an abortion, but in her jurisdiction, it was not legal. There were lawyers who were looking for individuals in her situation so that they could challenge the laws about abortion restrictions. And so they came to Norma and they said, we want you to be the face of a court case so that we can help you have an abortion and make your life better. The problem was that those lawyers told some lies about Norma's situation. They lied and suggested that she had been sexually assaulted, which in fact she had not. There were other lies that the lawyers in favor of relaxing abortion restrictions told before the Supreme Court, including that there were thousands of people dying every year from illegal, unsafe abortions. That was in fact not happening by the early part of the 1970s. But their case was persuasive, and the Supreme Court justices decided that there was significant disagreement about when life begins, and that there were differing personal opinions on the worth of an unborn child, that the decision to carry on a pregnancy and have children or to have an abortion was a sensitive and intensely personal one for a woman. And so they decided that the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution allowed for a constitutional right to abortion. The 14th Amendment had been passed relatively a long time before, about 100 years before Roe v. Wade, and it had been passed in response to the Civil War. So the text of the 14th Amendment says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So that amendment was designed to correct for the abuses of slavery and the way that some people were treated as less than human. But the Supreme Court justices in the Roe v. Wade case decided that this amendment had, as part of its sort of realm of influence, a woman's right to privacy. And that right to privacy governed her personal decisions about what she wanted to do with her body. Now, the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade also decided that the government did have an interest in protecting unborn children after the point of viability. Viability in this case meant, when can a baby survive outside of his mother's womb? At the time of Roe v. Wade, that was about 24 weeks gestation. And if you remember, pregnancy lasts about 40 weeks. So the Supreme Court divided pregnancy into 3 periods. They called them trimesters. They made this up out of whole cloth. It was not a medical distinction. It was something that the Supreme Court put into place, and they said, after the second trimester, states may make laws restricting abortion in some cases, but prior to that point, there's very few restrictions that they could make. And even after the point of viability, states had to allow abortions to take place in order to preserve the mother's health. Norma McCorvey, who I mentioned earlier, was the Roe. She was Jane Roe in the Roe v. Wade case. They gave her a fake name so that nobody would know who she was. The case took too long and she was not able to have an abortion. She gave birth and her daughter is still alive today. Interestingly enough, later in her life, Norma McCorvey, she had worked in abortion advocacy, but she actually converted to Christianity and became pro-life and did not appreciate the way that her life situation had been exploited to advance what she felt was a political cause. Norma just died within the last 3 or 4 years. The next major case that had to do with abortion took place in 1992. It was a case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. At that time, many states had begun restricting abortion before or after 20 or 24 weeks. So most of the United States had restrictions in place so that you could not have an abortion except in the case of sexual assault or to preserve mom's health after that second trimester. But there were some places where it was legal to have an abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. In Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court decided that whatever restrictions were being made were not allowed to cause what they called an undue burden on someone who was trying to get an abortion. Some of those restrictions that had been implemented were waiting periods. So from the time that you request an abortion until the time you could have it, there had to be a certain amount of time, usually 24 to 48 hours, that you had to wait so that you could make sure that this is what you wanted to do. There were parental notification laws. If you were a minor and you were procuring an abortion, your parents had to be notified. There were some laws that required that a woman seeking an abortion had to be allowed to see an ultrasound, or that she had to be given information about alternatives or the risks of abortion. And just in the last 10 years or so, there began to be other restrictions passed in particular states that made it so that you could not get an abortion if your reason for having an abortion was that your child had a disability or that you didn't like the sex of your child. You wanted a child of a certain sex. And then there were laws that required the abortion to be able to have admitting privileges at a local hospital, so that if the abortionist performed the abortion and there were complications that required hospitalization, that abortionist could make sure that the patient got admitted to a local hospital and could provide care. So the last relevant development is in the year 2000, was when chemical abortions became legal in the United States. A drug called misoprostol. It had been known as RU486, and sometimes you'll hear older people refer to it that way. A pill that you can take that causes an abortion, that became legal in the United States, but it was only legal to be used up until 10 weeks of gestation, because the research had shown that after 10 weeks, it didn't work. And so the baby could survive in most cases, and there were complications for mom. There have been, since 2000, I think there have been 24 women in the United States who have died as a result of chemical abortions. And so because of those risks, the Food and Drug Administration required that in order to receive a chemical abortion prescription, first of all, you had to have an in-person meeting with the doctor. The doctor had to evaluate your health, and then the doctor had to actually administer the first of those drugs to you while you were in the clinic. Since 1992, that was the high point of the number of abortions in the United States. The abortion rate has gone down by almost half over the last 30 years. And it kept declining until the pandemic, when since that point, the number of abortions has started to go up a little bit. And there are a variety of reasons why the abortion rate went down. The expansion of pregnancy resource centers that were available to women and men who were seeking abortions to provide them alternatives and assistance in their difficulties with pregnancy. Two really important reasons that are actually troubling for why abortion decreased. Number one, the birth rate overall has gone down. So people are just getting pregnant less. And that's partially related to reason number two, which is that people are actually engaging in less sex and less marriage and less dating, possibly because there's been a proliferation of pornography on the internet. And so people are exercising their sexuality individually instead of in relationships at all. Another demographic trend that may have contributed to the decrease in abortion is just that there were fewer childbearing age people, because since from 1973 to about 1992, that was a generation of folks that had gotten a lot of abortions. And so a lot of the people who would have been childbearing age in the last 30 years were aborted. They simply never reached maturity and had kids of their own. So they weren't having sex, they weren't getting pregnant, and they weren't having abortions. All of that is kind of a background story, but I think you need to understand that in order to get what the Dobbs decision is about. So what happened in the Dobbs decision is that state of Mississippi passed an abortion restriction that said after, I think it was 12 weeks, after 12 weeks gestation, they were going to make all abortions illegal. Now that conflicted with both the undue burden standard that Planned Parenthood versus Casey had decided in 1992. And of course, it also conflicted with the constitutional right to abortion that Roe v. Wade had decided. And the state of Mississippi did that on purpose. They actually wanted to challenge the framework of Roe v. Wade. And so they came up with this kind of radical in-your-face law that said, we want to significantly restrict abortions. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And between 1992 and 2022, the makeup of the Supreme Court substantially changed. Over the last 5 or 10 years, the majority has switched from justices that were appointed by Democratic presidents to justices who were appointed by Republican presidents. Now, Supreme Court justices are not supposed to have a political affiliation, or if they do, they're not supposed to let it affect their jurisprudence. What we do know, though, is that between Democrats and Republicans, there's not just a difference on how we view politics, there's a difference on how we view abortion. There's also a difference on how we view the Constitution. And justices appointed by Republican presidents tend to be what's called constitutional originalists, which means that they interpret the Constitution in light of what the people who wrote it meant when they wrote it. So the constitutional originalist justices believed that the 14th Amendment, which was passed in 1866, did not have in its mind abortion at all. And so it was really irresponsible to apply it to that situation. Furthermore, they felt that the Supreme Court had overstepped its bounds in Roe v. Wade by taking a situation that was being decided on a state-by-state level, and it's essentially inventing a federal law about abortion that had never been passed. So the Dobbs decision decided that states may legislate as they see fit about abortion according to the will of the people. It is not necessary for them to pay any attention to a trimester framework. And that means that a state can decide, like my home state of Missouri, for example, that has significantly restricted abortion so that it's basically against the law to get an abortion at any time for any reason, or the state across the river from us in Illinois, where it is basically legal to get an abortion at any time for any reason. And so Dobbs allowed that. Dobbs did not make abortion illegal. It did not tell states what they had to do. The decision wanted to return the authority for deciding about abortion to of the people, right? Because the United States is a representative democracy, and that's how we make, administer, and judge our laws. Since that time, this was June of this past summer, 14, the number is changing all the time, but at least 14 states have implemented significant restrictions like Missouri, and many abortion clinics, I think the latest number is about 40 abortion clinics across the United States have closed in those states where abortion has been significantly restricted. A handful of states in this year, in the last couple of years, have actually expanded abortion access. They have repealed previous restrictions that were on the books, like the state of Illinois earlier in their term. They did away with their parental notification restriction that said that if you were a minor, your parents had to know you were getting abortion. That's no longer required. Some states have actually passed laws that write the right to abortion into their state's constitution, right? So Massachusetts, New York, for example. A few states are still figuring out what they're going to do. This fall and next year, there's going to be some ballot initiatives where the voters will actually vote on what they want to do, what they want to be done about abortion. There have been increases in some places in public funding for abortion, even using tax dollars to pay for people to travel either to that state or out of state to another state where it's easier to get an abortion, pay for childcare, pay for hotel rooms during that time. That's public money, tax money that's being used to fund abortion. There have been a number of companies that have come out and said that for their workers, they will pay not only for their abortion procedure, but also for abortion travel. It is conspicuous and concerning that those same companies do not provide the same kind of financial support for adoption. In some cases, they don't provide the same kind of financial support for infertility treatments, for childcare, or for parental leave when you actually give birth to a baby. You can probably deduce why that is, especially when I tell you that the average abortion costs about $400 to $500. You should not think that corporations genuinely care about politics. What they genuinely care about is profit margins. And so an abortion is cheaper than childcare or pregnancy care or parental leave or infertility treatments or adoption or anything having to do with children and family. And actually, because family responsibilities can take away from your energy, attention, and productivity, corporations actually sometimes actively discourage people from getting pregnant in the first place. Another concerning development is that there have been several public officials, district attorneys or state attorneys general, who have publicly stated that they don't care if their state significantly restricts abortion. They're not going to enforce those laws. And so they are intentionally shirking their public duties to the people who have elected them. There are also efforts underway at the federal congressional level to pass a federal law that would make abortion a right. This is kind of the way it's going to go now in the post-Roe world. When one political party has the majority in Congress or the presidency, they're going to work to pass laws that are more favorable to abortion. When the other party has a majority or the presidential office, they're going to work to pass laws that are less favorable to abortion. And that's going to happen in every state. So it's not as if the Dobbs decision has, settled the matter. If anything, what it's done is taken the handcuffs off entirely so that abortion is now left to the will of the people. As Christians, I'm not sure that we agree with that really any more than we agree with the Roe v. Wade framework that said abortion is a right, and so you have to have access. We, of course, don't believe that morality should be decided by popular majority, especially because all of the people who vote about abortion restrictions one way or the other are not the people who are primarily affected by those, right? Because unborn children can't vote. So it doesn't seem to me to be a good precedent to set to allow the people in power to decide the fate of the people who are not in power. Because we may be in power today, but tomorrow, maybe we won't be. And then there will be a different group of people that we have paved the way for them to decide whether or not our life is worth living. My personal opinion, frankly, I think if you're going to have any government at all, the very first law that government should make is the strong people cannot oppress the weak people. And so it's kind of one of the first responsibilities of government to protect its most vulnerable. Otherwise, that government is going to be largely useless in creating a safe, free, and fair society, which is what we're after. Also, since the Dobbs case was taken, since it's been considered, since it's been decided, which is about the last 8 to 10 months or so, there's been a wave of violence and vandalism against for-life organizations, against peaceful for-life advocates, against pregnancy resource centers, and even against churches. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't know why you would direct a violence against pregnancy resource centers, because all they're doing is trying to help out people who are having a difficult time. I just can't understand why folks are opposed to that. But there is quite a bit of misinformation making its way around social media and even mainstream corporate media that we should know about and be able to respond to. One of the first sort of myths that's been popularized is that pregnancy resource centers are deceptive, they're manipulative, they get vulnerable pregnant women in their offices and they berate them with guilt, with scary photos, with threats about what's going to happen to them, and they basically try to pressure them into the Christian faith. I can assure you that that is not happening at any pregnancy resource center. Before I came to Lutherans for Life, I worked with a pregnancy resource center. I know what goes on there. I've been to many, many pregnancy resource centers, and I know the people who work and volunteer there. They are the most outstanding, not just citizens, but usually compassionate Christian people who not only want to provide material and emotional assistance during the time of pregnancy, but also after delivery. They don't just care about the life of that baby, they care about baby's mama, baby's daddy, mom and dad's relationship with each other, their relationship with their community, with their families, because the ultimate goal of a pregnancy resource center is not just to save a baby's life, it is to help a healthy family become part of a healthy community that we all can share in together. And anybody who's visited pregnancy resource centers knows that that is the case. So you have to be aware that there are people on social media and news media who are just telling lies about pregnancy resource centers. And I think that's probably the most despicable of the lies because it is so patently false. There's not a shred of truth to it. Another myth is that the Dobbs decision has made it so that some states have restricted not just abortion, but now a woman cannot go and be treated for miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy. This is also not true. Every state that has significant abortion restrictions includes explicitly in those state policies that women who are suffering miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy are not covered by those provisions. Here's the reason why. If a woman is suffering a miscarriage, it is because her baby has already died, and the body is simply expelling the body of the child that is deceased. In that case, any procedure that's undertaken to remove that body is not an abortion. What makes an abortion what it is the intent to end the life of the unborn. Anything else is either an early delivery, like a premature delivery, or it is simply a removal of an already deceased body in order to prevent infection from setting in. So we need to understand that people who are pro-abortion are using the word abortion deceptively and loosely to cover situations that don't have anything to do with abortion. Now, a woman who has suffered a miscarriage, whose baby has died before birth, may need to undergo a D&C, which is a dilation and curettage. That is the same name for an abortion procedure, a dilation and curettage. The difference, of course, being that a D&C abortion is intended to kill the baby, and a D&C procedure after a miscarriage, while it is still traumatic for the mother's body and for the mother's heart, it is only intending to remove that baby's body so that it doesn't essentially rot in mother's womb and cause an infection. Ectopic pregnancies are a different situation. An ectopic pregnancy, if you don't know, that is when the embryo implants outside of the womb. So it attaches usually in the fallopian tubes, although there have been cases of embryos implanting somewhere in the intestines or in mom's stomach. As you can deduce, those tissues are not designed to be flexible enough or to have the kind of nutrient and blood supply that that embryo needs to survive. And so not only is that baby destined to die, but as that embryo tissue accumulates, it could cause a rupture of those tissues and hemorrhaging in mom's body. It could cause infection and sometimes lead to death. There's a couple of things you need to know, though, about ectopic pregnancy. Number one, the statistics of the research tell us that in 99% of cases, by the time mom and doctor discover that the pregnancy is ectopic, the embryo has already died. So in that case, it's not a rescue mission, it's a recovery mission. In many cases, the surgery that's done will remove not just the embryo, but the entire fallopian tube, just to be safe. Although there are some situations where doctors will administer methotrexate, which is actually a chemotherapy drug, and that is intended to dissolve the tissue, detach the embryo tissue from mom's body so that she can pass it naturally. So in 1% of cases, it may be necessary for doctors to intervene in an ectopic pregnancy with a living embryo. In that case, again, we don't define that procedure as an abortion because the goal is not to put the baby to death. Now, we do understand that delivering an embryo before the point of viability is almost certainly going to result in that embryo's death. That's not our intention, but it is a foreseeable consequence. I will tell you, the best OBGYNs who have to perform those procedures actually view the embryo as their second patient, and they will undertake whatever measures they have available to them to try to save and prolong that embryo or that baby's life, in addition to saving and prolonging mom's life as well. And that's exactly the way that we want the medical practice to proceed. The other thing you need to know about ectopic pregnancy is chemical abortion doesn't affect it. This is actually a problem because there is a movement and even a court case that wants to remove the existing restrictions from distributing chemical abortion pills. There are already some websites where you can buy those pills, sometimes even without a prescription. There are websites that will send them to you from out of state or from out of country without any guarantee that what you're receiving is something other than sawdust. The biggest problem is that without an actual physical examination and an evaluation by a doctor in person, the doctor cannot rule out an ectopic pregnancy, right? A woman who is pregnant only knows that her body is changing, especially very early on in pregnancy. She doesn't know where the embryo has implanted because you can't see inside your belly. So Usually an ultrasound is necessary or some other means of collecting data and diagnosing. The problem is if you take those chemical abortion drugs and they have the effect on your body that they're supposed to have, it causes cramping, it causes bleeding, it causes you to pass tissue, like in similar to a normal menstruation, but kicked up several notches. And a lot of times those chemical abortions take place so early in pregnancy that a mother can't detect what kind of tissue she has passed. And so she may not know if she has delivered the tiny baby body, and that means that she doesn't know if the abortion is complete. In the case of an ectopic pregnancy, she may think I'm not pregnant anymore, and meanwhile that embryonic tissue is still accumulating in that fallopian tube, and she runs the risk of that rupturing and causing hemorrhaging, infection, sepsis, and death. So the increase in the availability of chemical abortion is actually very concerning because of that. And there is, like I mentioned, there's a case before the courts right now that seeks to remove all restrictions on making those drugs available. They'd actually like them to be in every pharmacy in the country. Another piece of misinformation after Dobbs is that if we restrict abortions, women are going to die because they'll be forced to carry to term pregnancies that endanger their life. Every responsible OBGYN that I have ever talked with says, I have never had to perform an abortion in order to save a mother's life. Again, the standard recommended course of care for when there is a health-threatening condition associated with pregnancy is observe and follow. In other words, wait and see. Most times, that condition will self-resolve, or there are medical treatments that can be undertaken to manage or alleviate the symptoms and the dangers. That being said, if observe and follow doesn't resolve the situation, then the next step would be a premature delivery, right? Again, the goal is not to put baby to death, but to try to save mom's life and baby's life at the same time. It is never the case that it's absolutely necessary that we undertake an emergency killing of the baby in order to save mom's life. Other pieces of misinformation after Dobbs, there's language about now mothers are going to be forced to give birth to babies. Well, that's kind of a dishonest way of describing what happens. That's like saying the state is forcing you to digest the food that you put into your body. It's not actually the state that's forcing you to digest your food, it's your body. The state has made it illegal for you to cut out your stomach, or at least to seek a doctor's help in order to cut out your own stomach because you don't want to digest the food. But we don't say that the state is forcing us to digest the food that we eat. In the same way, the choice of whether or not to have a baby is bound up inseparably because of biology with the choice to engage in sexual activity, right? And the state is not forcing or forbidding any sexual activity. People have just as much choice in that regard as before. What the state is forbidding is committing violence against another person, an innocent bystander, because you regret the choice that you made or the outcome that it had. Now, I am very sympathetic to people who regret the choice to engage in sexual activity or the outcome that it has when they become pregnant. I'm sympathetic to a young man or a young woman who says, I can't have this baby, it's going to end my life. Because you're not wrong, right? Having a child changes who you are. The old person that you were who lived primarily for yourself goes away. You have new responsibilities, but you also have new privileges. And I would say that having children actually makes you a better version of yourself. I would also say, even people who engage in sexual activity because they want children with the express purpose of procreating are not ready for children. You are never ready for kids. They are a gift from God. He's always ready. He always provides what we need. And he is responsible in some cases for changing our hearts and our behaviors substantially from what they were before we had kids. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that children actually make your life better. But nobody is forcing pregnancy on anyone, except in the case of sexual assault. And that is kind of a special category when it comes to talking about pregnancy. Suffice it to say, abortion is not the best solution that's available for that. There's very, very few women who conceive as a result of sexual assault and undergo an abortion to solve that problem. There's very few women who say, oh, I feel so relieved. This made everything better. There are very many women who become pregnant as a result of sexual assault and undergo abortion and say, that made things worse. It was like undergoing a second trauma and victimization. There are also very many women who become pregnant as a result of sexual assault and carry their pregnancies to term and choose to raise those children and say that, as a matter of fact, it was carrying the pregnancy, giving birth, and raising that child that helped me recover from the violation of that sexual assault, because I was able to take control back. I was able to use this bad situation for something good, and my body brought something wonderful out of something awful. Be that as it may, I think we should invest our efforts and our public funding in responding to situations of sexual assault with emotional and behavioral supports, counseling and therapy, and pursuing, prosecuting, punishing, and discouraging sexual assault in the first place. I think those would be much better solutions to what I agree is an awful situation than abortion. Another myth about abortion restrictions in the wake of Dobbs' decision is that women are going to be prosecuted for their miscarriages or for their abortions. Again, that is not the case. Every state that has restrictions about abortion and penalties for transgressing those restrictions explicitly states that the women who undergo those abortions are not to be prosecuted. There simply is not. We don't have that will or that intention at this time, and there has never been a history of that in abortion jurisprudence and legislation in the United States ever. So that's some of the misinformation. There's a lot more misinformation out there about abortion, and we really could go on all night. I love answering those questions, and if you have some of those, we'll have time for that. But I want to move on just very briefly to the answer to the question of what can I do, because we're getting a lot of those kind of inquiries at Lutherans for Life, which is such a good thing. People are not just sitting on their hands and saying, okay, Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Now everything is happy and back to normal. People are asking, what can I do to care for folks who are undergoing surprise pregnancies? Well, first of all, I recommend building genuine relationships with all the people around you. This is the greatest antidote to abortion is community. And the greatest way to witness to the sanctity of life is to treat the person right in front of you as a real gift and a privilege. So enjoy people in whatever ways God has given you to do that. Not everybody is extroverted, not everybody is introverted, but you do have ways that you enjoy engaging in relationships. So do that. Engage in those relationships. Build genuine relationships with people. And then celebrate and delight in the blessings of life that God gives you and share them with the people around you, whether that be brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers. new little nieces and nephews or children of your own, celebrating kids, celebrating senior citizens, octogenarians and nonagenarians who live to be very old, and the wide variety of things that every human being has to offer to make your life and this world a better place. See those, notice them, celebrate them, delight in them. They are gifts from God. And then share that life, those blessings with the folks that you know. Third, prepare yourself to serve and assist in the case of a surprise pregnancy. If you've never thought, what would I say if I had a friend or a sibling who said, I'm pregnant, you can't tell anybody, and I don't know what I'm going to do? What would I say? What would I do? If you haven't thought about those things, give some time to reflecting on that. What resources would you need to know where they are and how to access them so that you could help that person in that difficult time? What would you want to say? What would you not want to say? Which people would you want to connect them with? Do that research for yourself. Fourth, as you build relationships with people around you, make sure to ask questions. Listen to what they have to say. Sympathize with their griefs. And this goes especially for folks who disagree with our for-life convictions. I don't think there are very many people out there that disagree with for-life convictions simply because they hate human beings or they hate the idea of pregnancy and childbearing. It's usually the case that people who are in favor of abortion are in favor of it because they're afraid of something worse, something that they feel is worse, or because they have suffered a traumatic situation, or they know someone who has suffered a traumatic situation. The best thing we can do for those folks is to listen to their hurts and to sympathize and to acknowledge that when awful things have happened, we grieve those, God grieves those. He does not willingly inflict pain and punishment on anybody. Then engage in dialogue. Talk to people about the sanctity of life. Don't be afraid to bring up the topic of abortion, even though it is emotionally charged, politically difficult, sensitive. We have some really wonderful things to say about it, and it usually gives us an opportunity to speak directly to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is what we're all about. So to that end, share information about abortion policies, about abortion advocacy, educate other folks, take the information you've heard tonight and make up your mind to tell somebody tomorrow a brief summary of what you've heard or something that's stuck in your head. Publicize the work of Lutherans for Life, pregnancy resource centers, and other life-affirming organizations. Continue to research and learn yourself. Learn about the medical aspects of pregnancy and abortion, the legal dimensions, of course, theological considerations, and the social emotional considerations that are involved in situations of pregnancy or abortion. You can always donate either financial gifts or advocacy volunteering at a pregnancy resource center. I will tell you, once you get connected with a pregnancy resource center, that kind of work is addictive because it's like a front row seat to where God does miracles with the gospel. And as Christians, isn't that kind of what we all want in our lives, is just to be there and be a part of what God is doing as he is showing his love to folks. You will see a lot of that at pregnancy resource centers. I got addicted to it, which is why I'm in the line of work that I'm in. It's just amazing to be able to be a part of that. Continue to advocate for the sanctity of life. And that means you can learn how to reach out to your elected representatives and your state, local government officials. Let them know how you feel. In our country, it's not just your vote that is your voice. Those people work for you, and most of them actually do care about what you think. Of course, approach them with gentleness and respect, and I would actually advocate the same thing I said at the beginning, which is build relationships, build genuine relationships with your elected representatives. You're going to get a lot further with that, and you'll also be able to benefit from the way that they can make your life and your world better. And then finally, another wonderful thing you can do is learn about fostering and adoption, and consider whether God may be calling you to that as a means of advancing the sanctity of life or caring for children in need. adoption is not just a solution to infertility. Christians don't just adopt because we want children, although sometimes that's part of the motivation, but our main motivation is that there are children who need homes. And that's our motivation. So it doesn't matter whether you have chosen to build your family in a different way or whether you struggle with infertility or not. God may be calling you to adopt or to foster. So learn about that. Reach out to your local foster care service providers. Look for adoption agencies. Ask the questions. How would one go about adopting if they wanted to do that? Or what's involved in terms of costs, emotional considerations, in those sorts of things. So you can begin to think about that now. But most of all, continue to care. Don't give up in caring about these things and talking about them, because you have a whole life ahead of you of using sanctity of life situations like the Dobbs decision to be able to share God's truth and Christ's love, encourage and compassion with people around you. I don't know how long I was supposed to talk, Michelle, but that got through all of my notes. And my favorite part, of course, is question and answer. So I hope what I've done over the course of the last 45 minutes or so is give people lots of stuff to think about so that there are lots of questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pastor Salemink, for your presentation. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. What sort of questions do you have, or observations, concerns, those sorts of things? How many of you, just show of hands, how many of you are engaging in for-life activity, like on campus or with families? So some of you are already engaged in a variety of ways. I do see a hand up for a question. So Emily, if you want to jump in, go ahead. And then Austin, you're next.
I was just going to comment that I've noticed it's trendy on social media to have a baby during teen years. I wasn't sure if that's affected the number of abortions that have come in recent years, but I've noticed that it's trendy, and I don't know if you have any information on that.
That's a fantastic observation. I also noticed, several years ago, MTV had a popular program called like 16 and Pregnant or something like that. On the one hand, it seems like a really good thing that when people become pregnant in their teenage years, folks are celebrating that pregnancy as a good thing, right? That's way better than a situation where all we say is shame on you and how can you make this go away? It's going to ruin your life. On the other hand, it is, of course, concerning anytime that extramarital sexuality becomes like a popular thing. That's kind of a different message to talk about what's the best way to enjoy God's gift of sexuality. It's certainly not outside of the relationship of marriage. So it's kind of a mixed bag, Does it have anything to do with the reduction in the abortion rate? I bet it has contributed. My mom was pregnant at 16 years old in 1974, so 1 year after Roe v. Wade, and she received pressure from her school to drop out so that people wouldn't see she was pregnant and think that it was a good thing or something that they wanted to copy. That my folks received ridicule from their peers about being pregnant at that age. And of course, there was difficulty in the families, difficulty in the congregation about this situation. And it's because there's only one way you got pregnant, and that's by engaging in sexual activity. Sexuality, don't get me wrong, is a very good thing. It is a great gift from God, and one of the sort of the jewels of sexuality is procreation. So I'm excited that people view that as a good thing. I'm suspicious that there is a subsection of our culture that looks at a child as kind of an accessory or something that grants me attention or dignity that I wouldn't otherwise get. That's concerning. I don't think that every person who has a baby has those sorts of things, but those are just some of the reflections that I have on your observation, which is a very keen one.
Great question. Thank you, Emily. And I know Austin had a question as well.
I think I heard the pastor say something about talking to someone if you got pregnant. Okay, well, I'm a guy, for instance. I'm just saying, if I were a girl and then I got pregnant, I would have a hard time telling that to my parents or to my siblings or to anyone, because I would be in serious trouble. Or even as a guy, if I came back home and then I told them, okay, I got someone's daughter pregnant, that would be like me getting myself into a hot soup. So I'm asking now, what would I do in such a situation? Who would I talk to in that case?
Okay, I had a tough time catching all of what you said, but I think I got the gist that you're thinking about. Okay, if I was in that situation, if my girlfriend were unexpectedly pregnant before we were married, it would be intimidating to talk to other people in my life about it, and I would have this sort of reflex desire to hide it and make it go away. And I can affirm that is a natural response of panic and anxiety in a situation like that. That's kind of the normal way that people respond, and it's because we recognize pregnancy is a big deal, right? It's a life-changing thing. Your question, who would I turn to in a situation like that? There's two people that I would encourage you to turn to very first of all. The first would be your local pastor or another pastor that you trust. In that situation, I can always offer myself. My personal cell phone number is sort of public knowledge. It's on our website. And so if you wanted to reach out to me or recommend somebody to reach out to me to talk in a difficult situation like that, you can know that I would be able to listen without judgment and help you think through what are your options and make a plan for what you're going to do. We also have a confidential service at Lutherans for Life. It's called Word of Hope. And my good friend, Deaconess Chrissy Gillette, she's trained in both clinical psychology and spiritual care. And she answers that phone line 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and knows how to listen really well. She's a mom herself and has dealt with suicide prevention in both the military and civilian contexts. She's very patient and gentle and compassionate, and you can reach out to her entirely anonymously. That number is also on our website, but if you wanted to remember the Word of Hope number, it's 888-21-STORY, 21-STORY, and that's somebody you can reach out to. The other, in addition, your congregational pastor or a pastor that you trust in your community, the other place you can reach out to is a pregnancy resource center. Your local pregnancy resource center is going to have people who are specifically trained in how to listen and assist in a way that is best for you in those situations. And from there, those individuals can help you have conversations with the other folks in your life, beginning with your parents, perhaps your boyfriend or girlfriend, thinking about your family, your congregation, your teachers, your employers, folks like that. Those folks will be your advocates, people who can assist you. They'll help you figure out what to say, when to say it. Sometimes they'll even accompany you in those conversations, or you can have them in their facilities. So that's my recommendation. You always do have people who will be able to be on your side and be advocates for you in that situation. And thank you for asking that.
All right. Are there any other final questions? I definitely want to thank you for coming tonight. Our next Chats for Life will invite a guest speaker. We're having a guest speaker come from Northeast Indiana Right to Life. She will be giving you some apologetics, a brief apologetics course on how to talk about life issues with others, right? What's the logic behind, especially the abortion argument? What's the logic behind the life argument, right? So I hope that you join us then. Have a great night, and thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again, Pastor Salemink, for your presentation and wise guidance. So have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for today's life topic. Check out whyforlife.org or email Michelle at whyforlife.org to find out how and when you can go live with us at our next Chats for Life session. Or join us next time, right here at Why for Life Podcasts, where youth learn how to be gospel-motivated voices for life.